Okay, I guess we're off. You can hear me? Great. I'm Terry Marks. Thanks for having me here. I'm actually super excited to see all your young, fresh faces today. David Conrad, let's hear a word of applause for him. I just like to call applause for people. That's what we're going to do for 20 minutes. Actually, no, David asked me to do 20 minutes on honesty, and it's daunting because he meant the song by Billy Joel, which I thought was pretty weird, but here goes. No, honesty. Can we get that slide up here, the word honesty? It's actually a little intimidating because I think it calls to mind some sort of higher purpose, some sort of higher call for ourselves. Thanks. And for me, maybe a pang of guilt, and I feel like I should be maybe confessing something when I see the word honesty, and that's weird because I'm not even Catholic. It goes something like this. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 50 plus years since I've ever confessed. Let's see, I snuck a bowl of ice cream at 10:30 in the morning every day for 2 months when I was 3. I know there was stuff before that, but I can't quite remember it. And so that could take a while and be exhausting. So you can tell I'm keyed up. I'm excited. If I'm here to speak of honesty, I can only give you mine. And in all honesty, I feel compelled to tell you that when I began in this field, which I didn't study graphic design. I just wanted to use this rough talent that I had. And I think I wanted to be a creative genius. And now, after a number of years, I still want to use my talents, but I really want to be a good man. I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good father and a good friend. And it doesn't sound compelling, but through that, I want to help put valuable things into the world that help people. And I want to do that in my profession. And I want to use all that other stuff that I have that doesn't get used in my job. And I'm sure we all know what that feels like. And in all honesty, I'm trying to figure out what that looks like in the day-to-day. In prepping for this talk, I kept finding myself wanting to tell you about my parents, so I will. My mom is 4'10" if you count the hair. She usually weighed 95 pounds, didn't even break 100. And I was 10 pounds, 3 ounces at birth. She still doesn't talk to me. Now she's down to 86 pounds, 86, she tells me. And I think that's ironic because that's exactly what I weighed in the first grade, right? That's a big kid, right? But don't worry, in the second grade, I was sent to supplemental gym classes, and they called it Gym X. So it was me and all the other kids who were deficient in forward rolls, and they would have us rolling around on dollies and playing with a big parachute and try to teach us how to skin the cat. And I thought it was really weird, like the administration was saying, well, they took us out of math class to do this. Go over there. And I thought it was funny. It's like the teacher was saying, you don't need to know math because you're too fat. Both my parents came from timber people. My dad was literally born in a logging camp in Northern California. And my mom's family they were well-to-do. She was Korean. She still is. And her father was highborn, and they were lumber barons. And coincidentally, my wife's family, my wife's father, owned a logging camp in Alaska. I myself owned Lincoln Logs, so it all lines up. My dad, he looks like an elder Mr. Clean, but without the earring. One time when I was growing up, he decided to grow a beard. It was kind of this gorgeous salt and pepper thing, right? But he didn't grow the mustache. And since he's bald, his head looked upside down to me. He was 5'11", and this stout guy. I have my dad's width and my mom's height. And he was 5'11", but we're almost the same height right now, which means by the time I'm 65, I will be a hobbit. My dad's mother died when he was 6 years old, and his father was not a warm person, so I'm shocked that my dad is as nice as he is. And I think he owes it to his sister because they kind of raised each other. He was a high school All-American linebacker. He played football in college and paid for school by working at nights in a lumber mill. I can't imagine that. He played semi-pro football. He worked construction, and he used to go out and sing. He has a great voice. And he was singing in a bar in San Francisco. And this guy came up to him and asked him if he needed a manager, which sounds like, hi, weirdo. But he handed him a business card, and the business card said Colonel Tom Parker. And if you don't know who that is, that was Elvis Presley's manager. And my dad didn't know who that was. He's just like, get away from me, weirdo. And He later turned down a partnership in a very successful construction company and instead chose to work with the American Red Cross for 38 years. And he worked in conjunction with the military, primarily as a social worker, and then handling all the Red Cross services wherever he was. And so that meant he traveled the world, and he was in Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, Japan, Cuba, and Korea, among other places. And of course, Korea is where I met my mother. And I think it's funny, my dad tells me this story that when he left the United States and he first went to Japan, his dad's wife at the time, the last thing she said to him was, "Don't come back here with no gook wife." And I'm like, wow, what a peach. You know? And it's perfect because I'm allergic to peaches. My mother's Korean, but was born in Japan. And they made it, she was just a little kid, but she made it through World War II, and they lived in Sasebo in Nagasaki Prefecture. So when the bomb was dropped, she tells me that the entire sky was orange-red for like 2 or 3 days. And her brother was a high school engineering student. And with those people, they took the boys and had them work in underground munitions factories at night. So they'd go to school and then make bombs and bullets and things. And when the bomb was dropped, they kept all the students underground for 3 days. So when he came home, he was walking down the road, and my mother said it was, still devastation. Everyone thought he was a ghost because they were just sure that he was dead. And here's the weird thing. My dad's father refitted the USS Arizona in Bremerton before it shipped out to Pearl Harbor. So it's just a crazy dichotomy. After the war, my mother's family returned to Korea. And it's a place she had never been. I realized as an adult she was an outsider everywhere she's ever been. In Japan, where she was born, she was Korean, and that's second-class citizen or less. And in Korea, she spoke with a Japanese accent, so she was seen as other. And you can guess what she's regarded here. People will talk to her for 5 minutes and then say, "You speak very good English." It's like, well, I speak better than you. She still has an accent, and it cracks me up despite the fact that she has trouble with R's and L's, that she named her 3 children, names she can't pronounce. Donald, Lolinda, and Terry. Or as she would say, Donald, Lorinda, and Teddy. And I know it's cold, it's not nice, but I used to love it when she would ask me to go to the store. It's like, "Teddy, go to Piggity Wiggity and get me some popcorn and alpha alpha. Oh, stop and get me peanut butter parfait too, okay?" It's like, yeah, tell me more. This is gold. When they moved back to Korea, my mother's family, they actually lost all their property rights. And so they went from being well-to-do to absolute poverty. And my mother and her 4 sisters had to work in factories. The stories about, I worked in factories 10 or 12 hours. Literally did. And she was supposed to be going to the 3rd grade, but instead was wrapping filaments of light bulbs. And they had kids do it, honestly, because they had tiny little hands and could handle the work. It just blows my mind. I didn't realize these stories were true until I was an adult. And she upgraded in her second job to making brooms by hand in a factory. They really struggled for food. They didn't have rice, they didn't have meat. And she said when it got really bad, they would try to find bones that other people had thrown out and make a bone broth. And when it was really bad, they would take the rice hull, the outside of the rice, which is usually discarded, and they would soak it for a couple days and pound it till it got soft enough to chew, and they'd fry it. And it was during one of these times that she's at work and she produces, isn't this a happy story? Produces this tasteless rice husk. And the girl next to her produces a bento box with rice and fish, and she swooned. She couldn't take it. And so she was going to walk home, but was too weak, so she spent her week's wages on the bus, and she collapsed at the base of the hill about a mile from her home. And she woke up 2 days later, and they were preparing her for burial because they thought she was dead. And that's one of the easy stories my mom has. She eventually got a better job working for the American military in Pusan. Up? A little louder? Do I have to do this? Okay. I was wondering about that. Okay. Wow. I'm going to get whatever the person who last used this had. So she got a better job. She was working at Thing. That's where she met my dad. And when my dad began to court my mother, both families were like, no way, this is not happening. But my mother's family came around because my dad being bald, they thought that was a sign of wisdom. And it didn't hurt that he bought her mom a house. I think it was like $1.50 probably. But he did it, and my dad's family, it took them like 3 or 4 years to even talk to her. They just rejected the idea. And it still shocks me that at the time they got married, their marriage was illegal in 6 states. Doesn't that break your mind? It's crazy. So my mother, she's dignified and polite. She does not brook fools. She expects the worst. She's an Olympic class worrier. I'm sure she'd go pro, but there's no money in it. She has fingernails like this, bright red, and they're her own. They're formidable. She once Wolverined a guy's face, scarred him for life because he was trying to press the advantage. And to her face, he said, "I'm going to kill you." And he stalked her for 6 months. My mother's tough, and she's like 86 pounds. It's amazing. To understand my mom, though, this is all you need to know. I was visiting her and my dad once, and my sister and her kids were there. My mom goes out to smoke on the back porch, and she smoked since she was 14. So, if you're good at something, run with it, right? So she goes out to smoke, and I follow her out so I can talk to her. And my nephews, who are like 9 and 5, are playing catch in the backyard. And my nephew Casey throws the ball, and out of the corner of his eye, he sees my mom. And she's smoking, and he just, he's crestfallen. His shoulders slump, he's pouting. He walks up to her, and we're looking at him, and he says, "Grandma, I wish you wouldn't smoke. I don't want you to die." And I'm like, oh my God, maybe this will do it. And my mom opens her arms, and my nephew Casey walks in to get the hug, and she goes, "Pah!" That's my mom. My dad taught me what it is to hustle. Not by teaching me, excuse me, let me back up. He taught me how to run, not by teaching me the mechanics, but by letting me know I had more to give. He was my football coach my second year in the 3rd grade, and we were sent on a lap, and I wasn't exactly leading the pack. And before I knew it, I had the most extreme pain in my backside, and I found that I was literally in the air. It was my dad with his size 11 combat boot behind me screaming, "Move it, move it, move it!" And I was like, oh my God, I learned how to run. My dad taught me what it is to hustle, but he also sat me down and taught me what it is to be a sportsman. He said that we should bring our best effort to sports, but also our best selves, and that to have sportsmanship is to respect our opponent, to be a gentleman, to play by the rules, to win with dignity, and to lose with grace. I mean, these are big things. Maybe there's a pro or two who could use a lesson in that. When I was in the 3rd grade, I came home once. It was like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. My mom said, "Take a bath," which was weird. So I took a bath. I wasn't particularly dirty. I put on the clothes that were on my bed. And she says, "Come eat dinner." And it's like 4:30. I don't know what's going on. And I remember it was pork chops, applesauce, and peas, like the kick-ass kid dinner, right? And she hands me a suitcase, and I think, are they getting rid of me? I don't know. But it was, instead, my dad and I got in our 1972 Kingswood Estate station wagon with a fake wood grain paneling, super bad. And we stopped at the drugstore and got me a keychain flashlight and a couple comic books. And we drove from Denver. I really have to hold it right here, don't I? From Denver, Colorado to McMinnville, Oregon. We were going for my grandfather's memorial and to settle his affairs. And we were gone for 2 weeks. And the only thing I remember about the trip is being in the car with my dad. It was the coolest thing because we ate at truck stops in the middle of the night, and of course I was the only kid, and they were sketchy, right? It was awesome. And a couple times we slept in the back of the car and did like the hobo baths at the rest stop in the sink. I thought it was so cool. And for lunch we would stop at things that don't exist anymore, like mom and pop grocery stores. And you find a log of salami and some cheese, and he'd whip out his pocket knife and whittle off a little wheel of salami and slice some cheese and stick it on a Ritz cracker for me. I mean, I don't remember anything else but that, and I don't need to because it was awesome. And I think I loved it so much because my dad, working for the Red Cross, was gone for 2 years consecutively. I didn't see him for 2 years when I was a kid because he was in a forward service area in Vietnam and then a year in Korea, and it was just so great to have him back. And I really believe that my dad and I are so close because of that trip. I mean, I know it's a big memory for both of us. My dad did kick me in the butt, literally. But he's always been one of my best encouragers. My whole life, he's, affirmed what I can do. And I always just thought that's what a dad does, right? It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized I had won the lottery with my parents. When I first started my professional life, I took my dad out for pizza and beer, and we're talking, and he gets that look like, I'm going to tell you something important. And he looked at me and says, son, you can do anything you put your mind to. And at first I think, okay, this is what people say, teachers or mentors say this to you. But at that moment, at that time, I realized he really meant it just for me. He has that kind of belief in me. And it's a big deal. You can do anything you put your mind to. He obviously has never seen me play basketball. David Betts has. He knows it's sad. My dad, even though he was a social worker, always volunteered his time. And he looked at me as cheap labor to help him. Whether it was cutting sod at a golf course and laying it at the church, or selling Christmas trees in 14-degree weather in Denver, Colorado when I'm in the 4th grade, or making shave ice at a festival in Japan when it's 90 degrees and 90% humidity for his lodge. I learned the value of volunteering from my dad. From my mom, I learned that dignity has nothing to do with money. From my dad, I learned that almost anything is possible. And from both of them, I learned a real work ethic. And on that foundation, I want to share 7 ideas that have bubbled up that I hang on to. And number one, work-life balance, it's a fairy tale. We think we can divine this golden line, right, of work-life balance. It's a roller coaster, and all we can do is ride it and try to enjoy it. And if you're smart, get off once in a while and take a rest. Your dreams, number 2, your dreams do come true. And there's a danger in that. Someone said that desire is prayer, and the problem is prayers get answered. And if you desire something hollow or harmful, you might create your own hell. A few years back, I got to work on a book called Mr. Crumbly Dreams a Tiger, and it's about fear and desire. And I based it mostly on this quote that someone shared with me that says, in our modern society, we often think of desire as something bad. And that's rubbish, because if we consider the unblushing promises of nirvana or heaven, I'd submit that our desires are not too great, but too weak. And we're like children who make bun pies in the slum because we can't imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the ocean. We are far too easily pleased. The point being, our lives cannot be grand if our dreams are mundane. 3, the best things in life blindside you. I believe that much of the goodness in life happens while we're busy doing other things. This is a lame example, but due to my great height and athleticism, I tried out for football in college, and I thought, if I can make the team, I just want to contribute and have some fun, right? And what happens when you do that, because you can't have an opportunity to achieve something unless you fully commit, give everything you have. And if you do that, invariably what happens, a whole set of things that you can't imagine fall into your favor. And because of that, I have lifelong friendships. I had the opportunity to play and travel to France, Australia, New Zealand. I had all these lessons and things that affected me and changed my life for the better. The best things blindside you. I mean, for instance, for a long time, I thought I was going to be single my whole life. What a dummy. And of course, it's around this time, that I met the woman who's now my wife. I was busy doing other things. I thought I had it dialed in. And early on in our relationship, I asked her, what do you hope for? And without hesitation, she said, everything. I really liked that. I thought that was great. I can't give it to her, but I still really liked it. For too long, I had denied the notion that I cared for her the way I do. And of course, as it usually happens for me, I was reading something, and it was a quote that said, people choose, without knowing it, one of 2 things in life. We choose either comfort or truth. And if we choose comfort, we'll never have it. In the beginning, only half lies and soft soap, and in the end, despair. But if you choose truth, I believe you'll get it, along with everything else thrown in. Number 4, I'm not driving the boat. A friend of mine, I was having lunch with him, he got all excited and told me I'm a self-made man, that I'm the architect of my own destiny. Well, I'm here to tell you, life is willing to give you enough opportunities to get some bruises. And when you add all those bruises up, what you have is humility. You can do everything right, and things can still go wrong because you're not in charge. You're not driving the boat. And that's why it's important to paddle like hell. 5, impending good. I almost always feel like there's something good around the corner, even when I'm pissed off and depressed. If there's struggle now, it won't last because it's not the final word. There's something good around the corner, and you might want to call it optimism, but I think it's tougher than that. I think it's bigger than that. I can't really explain it. Churchill said that if you're going through hell, keep going. And I agree, because there's an impending good. 6, we need each other. These sound so corny, but it's meaningful to me. I used to love to lone wolf it, just, be alone. So I would tell my parents that I'm having Thanksgiving with a friend, and I tell my friends I'm having Thanksgiving with my parents. And twice I checked into a hotel, and I didn't talk to anybody but room service for 2 days. I slept, I read entire books in the tub, and I watched movies. It was awesome. It sounds really good, and I loved being busy. My ethos for a while was every waking moment should be productive, which is ridiculous, right? Because there's a real cost to that. You ever host a party, a big party, and so you spend your entire time making sure that the food and beverage are okay, you talk to everyone. At the end of the time, you might have had an okay time, but you're exhausted and you can't remember if you had a real conversation. It's like candy or maybe cocktails for the soul. It doesn't feed you. Early on in my life as an adult, I hated being at home because I always felt like I was missing something better going on. And now that I have a wife and a couple kids, all I want to do is be at home with them and hang out, preferably in my boxers and barefoot, because I don't want to miss any of that. Okay, this is about honesty. I'll just say it. I don't know if having a legacy is possible, truly, or if being remembered is possible. And if we're remembered, it won't be for having reached the top or how many toys we got, but for how we dealt with the people we encountered along the way. We need each other. And if faith exercises itself in hard work and hope persists to free us from our troubles in the impending good, the last article is love, which can only be gotten in vulnerability, in other people. We need each other. And the last thing is 7, you get by giving away. I don't even have to say anything about this, do I? I've been really fortunate. I've gotten to work with the AIGA Link program, the Infancy of Art with Heart, the Sappy Ideas That Matter, Good Thinking Atlanta. For the thousands of hours we put in at our jobs, and the good work that I'm proud of there and all the work that I'm not so proud of, I don't remember that stuff. I remember the moments. I remember the exchanges. I remember the people, those intangible things. When my nephew was 5, he's like 30 now and like 6'5". So he used to be like this tall. And I thought I'd be the cool uncle, and I was living in the Pike Place Market, and I thought, come hang out with me. And so I took him to the comic book shop, and I took him to the Science Center. I told him we'd make his Halloween costume, and of course he wanted to be Boba Fett from Star Wars. And so I go to Chubby and Tubby and buy a bucket and a glue gun, and I'm trying to figure out how to make the visor right. And so I go to Macy's, and I walk up and say, I'm looking for some pantyhose, some dark black pantyhose, really thick. And the woman says, well, baby, you probably need to wear a queen size. I'm like, oh, no. It's really not. She goes, it's okay, we get all kinds. So we make his costume, and he loves it, and he won't take it off. And I'm exhausted because I don't know how to take care of a kid. I could sprint, but I couldn't run distance, would be the analogy. And we're walking through the market, and all I can think of is, if I put him to bed, I can have a beer and finally relax. And we're walking, and he grabs my thigh. I'm like, what? And he's just hanging there. I go, Casey, what? And he looks up at me, and he says, Uncle Terry? Yeah? I really like you. And I'm like, oh, here's my wallet. I don't remember any of the work I did that week, but I will never forget that. You see, I think Charles Dickens had it right. When Marley's ghost shows up and scares the pee-pee out of Ebenezer, and Scrooge says, but you were always a good man of business. And the ghost says, business! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence, these were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Is this too corny? Is it too George Bailey? I don't know, but it's honest. Thank you. He asked if I think we as a society are getting more or less honest, and does it matter? I think everything's a pendulum, and that's just an observation I made in art history class, because it went from Renaissance to Baroque, and then that broke, and what happened? Realism, right? So the pendulum swings back and forth, and I think we have more of a desire to be honest, to be authentic, and I think because we're human, a lot of people in striving to be authentic actually put a real mask about it and cater something that feels authentic. I think we're human. And I don't know if we can really gauge that, because how would you take a poll, right? Maybe we'll know when we die. And it only matters to the extent that it's on our mind, because the more honest we are, I think the better things will be. It's like your parents said, honesty is the best policy. It's really painful, but I think they're right. Is it Q&A time?
Yep.
Questions? Yes. Oh, hey. Do things that...
Do something that you didn't want to, so that was dishonest, or against your kind of moral character?
Yeah, she's asking if I've ever been asked, and I think we all have, if I was ever asked by a client or a potential client to do something that I didn't think was above board. And of course, and it doesn't really matter to recount what they are. It just, you say thank you very much, and you say no. Those were pretty easy. It only gets tough when you see a real strong financial potential. But all I know is anytime I've tried to do something that I didn't believe in, but I thought the money was good, it always turns to dust. So, yeah. Other questions? Okay, all things have been answered. Yes, David.
I have one more. So it's been a quarter of a century.
Mm-hmm.
As you were starting your career,
Mm-hmm.
were there moments of kind of insight that you felt helped kind of direct you as far as your practice of becoming a designer?
He's asking about the inception of my career and if there are moments of insight. I didn't even know graphic design existed as a profession. A friend of mine who was in one of my PR classes, I only chose a major in college because they told me they would bounce me if I didn't declare in my fourth year. So I declared 2 majors, one in art and one in communications, emphasizing public relations. And I'd be the guy who would hand draw all the brochures for the Plum Commission or whatever we were. And he was smart, and he had internships and stuff. He said, you should be a graphic designer. And I didn't know what that was, but I was roaming around the library instead of studying one night, and I found the Communication Arts Design Annual, and I went, oh my God, it just blew me away. And those are really expensive and gorgeous, so you couldn't check them out. So I was the terrible student. I stuck it in my backpack, and they have the big sensors, so I threw it against the doors outside of the sensors and picked it up, and I cut out all the things I thought was cool, and then I returned the magazine. That was me. I apologize. I'm being honest. And that was a source of inspiration. And weirdly, I got recommended for an internship at a graphic design studio, even though I wasn't a graphic design student. And they hired me before I graduated, and they wanted me to be an account manager. And I said, yeah, wow, this is a crazy opportunity, because I wanted to use my visual art gifts, which were largely uncultivated. And I said, I'll be the account manager if you let me sit with the artists. And so I ended up by default doing a bunch of stuff. I went, oh my gosh, this is an opportunity. There are brands out there that I designed the logo for. I wasn't assigned it, but I didn't have anything to do for a week. And so somebody else would be working on it, and I would do this big sketch and go, what about that, to the art director? And he would make the other person, make that logo. And so they hated me. And by default, I ended up designing the first 3 Zoo Lights exhibits and things like that. And so, yeah, it was a bit of an epiphany that there's an opportunity here. Other questions? Yes.
What is your reaction when somebody's really honest with you and it makes you feel bad? Or on the vice versa, if you're really honest with somebody, it makes them feel bad?
Well, did everyone hear the question? How do you react when someone's really honest with you and it makes you feel bad, or vice versa? You're really honest with someone else and it makes them feel bad. I think that's inevitable. And one of the tactics that I'm trying to learn, certainly it's easier in business. As a creative person, sometimes we're so tied to our creation that an estimation of that feels like a personal affront. Over time, I've really learned to divorce that from myself. That's not me. And I heard a friend who's smarter than me say that someone else's opinion of me is none of my business. And I think that's right. And that's the way it should be, because we can't control what they see, because it's not always true, and it's not always about me. And to bring up my dad again, he always would quote Shakespeare and said, "The truth will out." That, you know, if someone's chewing you down when you're not around, the truth is going to show over time. And that's about all we can do, because if you get into the middle of it with them or rail on somebody for telling you the truth, I guess it depends, to your question, what's the intent? Are they trying to be evil and mean, or are they trying to help you? Other questions? Yes.
Just in terms of continuing that,
Mm-hmm.
bringing it out to this sort of collective, how do you create that work environment?
Oh, the work environment?
Upholds honesty as a...
Well, she was asking, how do you create a work environment that upholds honesty? And all I know is that once you get more than 7 or 8 people, suddenly you have politics. And it gets really, really hard. And you should have an HR person by the time you have 6 people. Because you need a referee, and if you're lucky, you have someone who acts as the den mother, or the kind of litmus test that says we treat each other kindly, we act honestly. And if you're not into it the way everyone else is, maybe you should just leave. And that's fair and kind. But like I said before, we're human. And humans get selfish when we don't even know we are. And so at some point, you can't really address it. And that's where having some hierarchy helps, because there are some people that I know, it's not me, who can say almost anything to anybody and it sounds fair, even when it's really brutal. And sometimes that brutal thing needs to be said, because I think the technical term is some people pee in the pool and they don't even know they're doing it. And you can see when they walk in the room, the whole place goes, oh crap. That's not great. We have to find a way to remedy that. Does that help?
It does. I mean, I think you need to, I like what you said about being kind as well as honest, when those two are together, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
That's, you know, in terms of starting a company or starting a new project,
Mm.
or, you know, creating the trust. You know, I think if there's no trust, there's no honesty in the group. You know, and the kindness is really important. You said the delivery. But I feel like there's different cultures,
Mm-hmm.
even within different workplaces in different parts of the country and the world, that understand and are comfortable with honesty, and other places where you're saying the exact same thing, people are egos, or they just seem like they're so delicate that they can't handle it.
Having a delicate ego, well, this is what I'm saying about, you know, life giving you bruises. Because if you have a delicate ego, you're going to get more bruises. And we've all gotten them at some point. We're at different stages of developing calluses, I guess. I don't know. Terrible analogy. But if you can't handle the honesty that's meant for your good, given in kindness, I think that's on you, right?
As a leader,
As a leader, you have to live that way. You have to demonstrate it. And you can't, and I'm saying this not because I've done it, because I've really missed sometimes, that when someone goes far afield and they act with reprehensible behavior, especially in the group, you have to kill it then. And you have to call it out. And you don't have to berate them in front of the group, but you have to say, that's enough. We need to talk. And you have to set the standard. And it's not about fear, it's about safeguarding this thing that you've built, that you're building. Because that spirit is a living thing.
Just one more question.
Okay.
What do you think about the phrase, fake it until you make it?
Fake it until you make it? Who's done that? Fake it until they make it. Every hand should be up. because we can't know everything, right? And I know I learn by experience. I fall in the side door of things, and that's how I do my best learning. I think there's truth there, and a lot of that is just about your willingness to learn. And if you're willing to learn, you're willing to take the hard thing, the hard honesty that someone's willing to give you. I learned about printing. I didn't study design. I learned a ton about printing because I went to my first press check, and my boss handed me a Pantone chip and said, go press check this thing. I didn't know what a press check was. I'd never seen a printing press, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do. So I went to the guy in charge, who seemed like a decent guy. You know, he's like wearing a button-down shirt and tennis shoes and sweatpants, you know. Not an executive. And I said, I don't know my butt from a hot rock when it comes to this, but I know if I rub one of them, it starts feeling good, so that's probably my butt. Will you teach me about printing? And over the next few years, he taught me everything. So the fake it until you make it's fine. You just have to do the learning otherwise. Okay. Thanks. Thanks, David.